So, welcome everyone. My name is Julia. I'm the museum program specialist, and this is Christopher Steinbiß. He is broadcasting live, and he was so kind to do this all the way from Germany for us. He's doing his PhD on the HAGENUK suit, which is one of the armored diving suits we have in our exhibits. He came all the way from Germany to research it, to study in our library using our many resources, and now he is going to be presenting to us on that suit and its history. So without further ado, I'm going to let Christopher go ahead and introduce himself and take us away.
Thank you very much for your kind introduction. I'm very excited to be joining you today and to talk a little bit about my research. So, a little bit about me. I'm a researcher at Hamburg University in Germany and a historian of technology and German history. Today, I want to talk to you about debatably the first functioning armored diving suit ever created and about the early history of its creation. Now, some of you, if you have visited the exhibition before, might know this very suit, which in German would be called Tiefseetaucher or Deep Sea Diver in English, and you might know as the HAGENUK diving suit. So this is the object I want to talk to you about today, but maybe not quite in the form that you know and that you are familiar with. Some quick facts about this deep sea diving suit. It was the first functioning and, very important distinction, first commercially used atmospheric diving suit. It was developed in Germany between around 1906 and 1935 and built by the marine apparatus company of HAGENUK. It was used mainly for wreck salvage operations, and it had a working depth of about 60 to 90 meters or around 200 to 300 feet. Its depth record was around 270 meters or 700 feet. Now, what do I want to talk to you about today? I thought it would be nice to bring you some of the stuff that I'm researching about the early history of the diving suit, because this history is not very well known and it's based almost entirely in German language sources. So this would be a great opportunity to present some of these sources and some of the discoveries that I've made to you. Right here, you can see a timeline of all the different suit prototypes in its stages of development. And I would like to present to you my thesis that this deep sea diving project started out as a one-man amateur project and then continuously professionalized into a project that became institutionalized, that had a lot of professional work done on it. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is the gentleman in the upper left corner, who's called Friedrich Gall, who is credited as the original inventor of the HAGENUK diving suit. I will mainly be focusing today on the green part of this timeline. So starting around 1906 and then working our way all the way to 1926, where I will end for today. The leading question that I brought for this presentation is, how did one layperson's vision lead to the development of the first viable deep sea diving suit? Now, to understand why this suit was developed in the first place, one needs to understand the status of diving work in the early 20th century. So the main problem that deep diving work faced at this time was that there was a border of safe diving work, which was defined at around 40 meters. You can see here in figure 6 the part of a pamphlet talking about the advantages of the deep sea diver, which you can see right at the bottom at around 200 meters. And this pamphlet very much explains the possible depths that can be reached and where work can be done in diving. So it's important to understand that this is around at the advent of mixed gas diving. So mixed gas diving has not been discovered yet at the start of this development phase. And it also took some time to take off after being discovered. So people are mainly diving with air or are diving with oxygen. Now, the divers amongst you will know this way better than I do, but one of the main challenges that diving faced was the decompression sickness. So the very basic gist of it is that once you're under a lot of water pressure, nitrogen can dissolve more easily in your bloodstream. And if you're ascending too fast, this nitrogen cannot dissolve fast enough and starts building bubbles, which can lead to tissue damage, serious injury, and death. This was one of the many challenges that divers faced working at greater depths. And this, amongst other challenges, led to diving being one of the most dangerous professions in the early 20th century. Now, the solution that a lot of people came up with was that the diver has to be able to work completely isolated from water pressure. How would they achieve this? By building something called an atmospheric or armored diving suit, which would consist of a pressure-resistant hull and thus have atmospheric or normal above ground pressure inside of the suit so that the diver could work without being exposed to water pressure. Now, to be able to work, you would need flexible arms and legs. And this turned out to be a surprisingly difficult engineering challenge. You can see here in figure 7 the Carmenol diving suit, which was built by two brothers from France in the 19th century. And this very much exemplifies what creating such a suit, what makes creating such a suit so difficult. So as you can see, this suit has a lot of joints to make work underwater possible. But every single joint you build in a suit is a potential weak point for water to get in. This is why this suit never left prototyping stage and was never used in diving work. Now, the challenges in creating such a suit are talked about by Kucharski, which is one of the engineers of the HAGENUK diving suit. He writes in one publication from 1927, the technical challenges involved in designing such an armored diver can be divided into four main categories. Building a joint that is completely watertight and easy to move despite the high pressure, designing the limbs, especially the arms and working claws, in a practical way, the breathing apparatus for the diver enclosed in the pressure-resistant housing, and finally, the design of this housing. Now, the person that actually is credited with solving these problems and developing one of the first commercially used armored diving prototypes is called Friedrich Gall. And he's a pretty unknown figure. Not much is written about him other than him being credited for this invention. Here you can see Gall ascending from one of his diving suit prototypes in figure 8 at one of his diving tests. Now, Gall is a very interesting character. He has been quoted to say something that I think very much encapsulates his character and his reasoning for working on the suit. I don't know how to say it, but all my plans revolved around the water. He was very much obsessed with the idea of developing technologies for working in the water, extracting resources from the water and making a lot of money doing so. Now, Gall, I brought you a little map of Germany at the time, so you can tell where we are in the story. Gall was from Essling, which is a part of Swabia, which is a region in Germany. And Essling is positioned around here in this yellow part of Germany, which is called the Kingdom of Württemberg. Now, you might notice, if you look at the map, that this is about the farthest you can get away from the sea in Germany. So a question immediately arises, how did Gall come up with the idea to work on this technology? Now, Gall does even get more confusing of a character if you look at his credentials. He sometimes gets called a schoolmaster, but he actually worked as a turner. So not quite the profession you would imagine from a deep sea diving engineer. He had no technical experience and also no diving experience. So possibly the most unlikely person to face these engineering challenges. Now, how did he get to have this idea of building a suit like this? In one newspaper article, it is written that, like many Swabians, Wanderlust drove him out into the world at a young age. He served as a Dutch soldier in India for 7 years. It was in the waters there that his brooding mind conceived the plan of the deep sea diver, which would make it easier, more extensive, and safer to extract the treasures of the South Seas in the form of corals, pearls, and sponges. So, around the turn of the century, he goes to India as a colonial officer for the Dutch, and there he gets this idea of extracting resources from the deep sea. Now, Gall was no engineer, he was no metal worker, he was no diver, but he had a very important skill to make this technology possible, and that was gathering investors. Now he's pictured here with one of his early prototypes and one of his most important investors, who I will tell you about shortly. Once Gall had this idea to develop a deep sea diving suit, he started collecting investments from friends and family members. We actually have the original list of all his investors, so that's figure 12. And as you can see, he managed to collect a nice sum of money, but someone definitely paid him more money than all the other people combined. Well, roundabout, which was Ernst II zu Hohenlohe-Langenburg. So as you can tell by the very long name, this was a German noble family. And Ernst II was the prince of this family, who would inherit the titles. And he was very much a venture capitalist. So he would invest in all kinds of projects in the hopes of growing his fortune. And he really supported Gall's vision from an early stage. So the earliest information we have about Gall comes from letters that have been written to and from this prince. Gall used all of his investment money to get experts to help him. So he would get metalworkers, he would get engineering help. Actually, he also got help from engineers from Zeppelin, which you might know as the company that used to build the airships, the quite famous ones, who came around to his workshop where he would be working and who would help him figure out the technical stuff. Gall was all in on his vision, and this led to him investing all his money, all his time, all his livelihood into his idea. Now, what was this idea that he was so successful with gathering investors? Now, his main focus was on revolutionizing sponge diving. Sponges were becoming a pretty big thing in Europe, and most sponges that would be used would be natural sponges, because artificial sponges really weren't a thing at the time. Now, Europe faced a few problems in the sponge markets, which was that sponge fishing was mainly done outside of Europe, so particularly in the Pacific, and that there had been a lot of demand, which led to overfishing and to divers having to seek greater depths. So diving, again, one of the more dangerous professions of the time, and greater depths come with a lot more risks to the diver's health. And divers were also very poorly paid in the sponge diving business. So Australia, which had a booming sponge diving economy, actually had plans at the time to forbid deep diving. Now, this was not a unique problem for sponge diving. Pearl diving faced quite similar challenges, which led to Gall coming along and telling his potential investors that his deep sea diver could solve all of those problems. Now, Gall did not have any engineering knowledge or any formal engineering education, let's say, but he did do his own engineering. And he spent a lot of time experimenting. He experimented with different metals, he experimented with different joint designs, and he had assistance through experts, quite a lot of it, but he did a lot of the designs himself. Now, a lot of experiments lead to a lot of engineering failures, especially in his case, because he would keep doing experiments even though the experts told him that this is not going to work, this is a bad idea, but he just kept doing this experiments, which finally led him to possibly his greatest and most important invention, which was an airtight ball and socket joint. So a ball and socket joint, which would allow the diver to move underwater quite freely, while also not being as weak to being penetrated by water and ruining the design. More about this joint later. Now, a lot of experimental failures led to Gall bleeding dry his financials. So by the late 1900s, Gall had no more resources to continue development. At the same time, the deep sea diver was not even close to market readiness. Now, he did not even manage to build a full prototype by the time. And he started, once his money ran out, complaining quite extensively to his investors. So here in figure 16, you can see a letter that he wrote to the prince, where he tells him about his woes and financial troubles. Here, a little excerpt. I hardly know how highly I now regard His Highness above the pitiful, petty capitalists. It seems to me as if they belong to the intellectually poor. I cannot possibly convert them to my cause. And here, in this excerpt, you can really tell a lot about Gall's character. He thought of his development of the deep sea diver as a cause, as a mission, and he followed it almost religiously. Now he kept working on the suit, even though he had no more money and no more resources, and his investors really did not want him to fail. So they decided to help him out, to find him a partner, an industry partner with proper experience and resources. So in 1911, Gall gets hired by Neufeld und Kuhnke, or NUK for short. This was a company for nautical instruments, which built seafaring equipment and radio technology. And Neufeld und Kuhnke had just acquired the Hanseatische Apparaterbaugesellschaft Hamburg, or HAG for short, which is not only a very nice example of the tendency of the German language to make very long words, but also the successor of Ludwig von Bremen, which some of you might know as one of the first German diving equipment companies. So you have these two companies. You have one company that is really big, has a lot of resources and a lot of knowledge in nautical instruments, and you have this company that has experience in diving equipment. And those two come together and hire Gall and buy the rights to the deep sea diving designs to continue this development. Now, again, back to the map. Where are we now? We moved considerably closer to the sea. Now, Neufeld und Kuhnke is stationed in Kiel, which is right here on the German coast. And as you can see, very much connected to maritime culture and also to maritime technology. Now, to this day, this is the case, as in Kiel, the German submarines still get built. And it was no different back then. So if you ever hear about new German submarine designs coming out, they are being built right there in Kiel. And the HAG, the other company, is from my hometown, Hamburg, which is this red part of the map. And as you can see, it's connected to the sea by a pretty big river and has also a big maritime culture, as well as a big diving industry, because at this time the harbor gets built and a lot of diving work is required to build the harbor. So now you really have everything Gall needs to accomplish his vision. You have a company with resources, with experience, with engineers, and in a place where a lot of testing can be done. Now, in 1937, Neufeld and Kuhnke and the HAG fused together to become the company of HAGENUK. As you can see, the two company names fused together, HAGENUK, which is why you know the deep sea diver as the HAGENUK diving suit. With these new resources and newfound opportunities, Gall started developing some early prototypes of the deep sea diving suit. Prototype 1, he actually finished a year before being hired at HAGENUK. Here you can see a picture of the proud inventor next to his invention, and you can very much tell this is an early prototype. Now, two things are quite interesting about this prototype to me. For one, it is the first use of his joint design, which you can see in figure 21. So this is the ball and socket joint. You can see the ball, you can see the sockets, and you can see the little balls in between ball and socket, which would be ball bearings. So that is the trick to keep the joint from leaking, from taking in water. Now, Gall is not the first one to come up with a ball bearing design, but he is the first one to do it with this ball and socket joint. And this is very much what makes this technology possible, because you need the flexibility, you need the water resistance, and this is the first joint that really does that in a workable way. Now, the second thing that this technology has, which I think really tells a lot about how Gall envisioned his suit to be used. You can see in figure 20, at the rear end of the diving suit, he installed a little seat for the diver. So the diver would be able to rest because he would be underwater for up to 4 hours. That was his vision. He would need the ability to rest in between shifts, if you will. So a little seat in the first prototype of the HAGENUK diving suit. Now, the second prototype came out in 1912, where Gall was working for HAGENUK already. You can see it here. And this design is notable for being the first HAGENUK diving suit with a buoyancy device. You can see it in figure 23. And the idea for this buoyancy device was a telescopic tail attached to the diving suit. So the idea was you have the tail, it was telescopic, so it can extend, and it would be connected to pressurized air. So it could extend, make the suit buoyant, and help the diver rise to the top of the water without assistance. Now, prototype 3 from 1914 is where you can really see some substantial changes in the suit design. The body gets way more cylindrical, and also the diver now enters through the helmet of the diving suit. Also, the number of joints is drastically reduced. You have a lot less joints in the suit, which is connected to the discovery that even though Gall's joint design is really nice for flexibility and water resistance, it's not perfect. And every instance of possible leakage needed to be reduced. So the obvious way to accomplish that was by reducing the joints, the number of joints. Also, the buoyancy device, as you can see in figure 25, gets moved to the head. And it's not a tail anymore, it's now a buoyancy halo, which could be filled with pressurized air to help the suit rise. Now, this is the design that would be used for the next number of prototypes. But our next prototype actually becomes very interesting because it's from 1916. Now, 1916, in the middle of the Great War, or World War I, as we call it in Europe. And because it was this diving technology that was built in Germany during the war, it was tested by the German Imperial Navy, which means we actually have numbers about the suit. So it weighed just under 300 kilograms. It had a diving depth in tests of about 140 meters or 375 feet. And its stayed underwater for 53 minutes. Pretty long time. But even more impressively, it had an ascending time for 1 minute and 3/4. So an incredibly fast ascending time. Now, the German Imperial Navy really hoped to be able to use this technology for submarine rescue, because submarine warfare was a big thing for Germany in the Great War. But the technology never quite reached the stage to be used in the Great War, so this never happened. But we still have the original documents telling about these tests. I would be amiss to not mention what a profound impact the Great War had on Europe at the time. This also led the diving suit development to go in a completely different direction. So the Great War devastated Europe. It was one of the bloodiest, one of the most terrible conflicts the continent had ever seen. And Germany especially used quite shady tactics in the war. So it invaded the neutral country of Belgium. It used poison gas quite extensively, and it also waged unrestricted submarine warfare, the most important point for this presentation. But this led to Germany being held accountable after the war. They lost the war, they were held accountable, and the Versailles Treaty was drafted up. And in this treaty, again, I'm going through a lot of European history in a very short amount of time. In this treaty, among other things, Germany was to have no more war technology, which included warplanes, which included submarines, and Germany had to pay enormous war reparations as well, crippling the German economy. Now, during the war, thousands of ships had been sunk, and this led to a lot of shipwrecks. And these terrible human tragedy of the war, at the same time, was seen as a new opportunity for deep sea diving technology. So the idea was, and you can see this in prototype 5, here shown at a newspaper article from 1922, the idea was to use the deep sea diver not for sponge diving, not for submarine rescue, but for wreck diving and wreck salvage. The prototype 5 is the first HAGENUK diving suit that actually saw some use outside of testing. In 1922, it had its first big media experience, which was connected to a proposed salvage of the Lusitania. Now, you might know the Lusitania as one of the most famous wrecks in all of history. It was sunk in the Great War by a German submarine, which attacked it via a surprise attack. It was a civilian ship, and it was sunk with over 1,000 civilians on board, of which many died, including many Americans, which was one of the reasons for Germany being held accountable after the war, as well as one of the motivations for Americans to join the war later on. Now, because of the great importance the Lusitania had in popular culture at the time, it was mystified in a sense that people started spinning all kinds of tall tales about the wreck. It would have a lot of treasure. It would actually have been a weaponized warship, all kinds of different legends, which led multiple salvage companies from Britain and from the US to want to salvage the Lusitania wreck. Now, the Lusitania was sunk at a water depth which was way below normal salvage work. And so the idea was to use all kinds of experimental technologies to reach the wreck. There was a party in Germany that did not like the idea of British and Americans salvaging the Lusitania, and that was the DNVP, which was the pro-emperor party at the time. So Germany, after the war, becomes a republic, but there are still a lot of pro-monarchists in politics, and this party wanted to prove that the Lusitania carried weapons because they hoped they could legitimize the German attack on this ship this way. And HAGENUK sees all this different discussion about the wreck and decides now's the perfect time to present our technology and maybe pretend like we would be able to reach the Lusitania. So they show up in a lot of newspaper articles. They create a lot of buzz in the media, but no salvage ever happens. Not from the Americans, not from the British, not from the Germans. And the first time that the Lusitania wreck is actually reached is in 1935. So quite a long while until then. However, after this Lusitania fahrt, in 1925, there was a British submarine called M1, which collided with a passenger ship and sank in the harbor. And one salesman of Neufeld and Kuhnke got notified of this sinking submarine and pitched to the British government that they could use this very prototype to search for this sunken submarine. And the British accepted, so this prototype and expert diver were put on a speedboat from Germany, sent to Britain, and started searching. They did not manage to find the submarine, unfortunately, in time, but they did actually reach a new death record while searching for this ship. And they created a lot of good publicity for the company, as well as for Germany, who just in 1925 rekindled a lot of its international connections after being shunned after what they did in the Great War. So these events happen and they create a lot of positive media coverage about this suit. Now, what happens is salvage prospectors see this suit and get interested because they want to reach shipwrecks that are way deeper than they can reach with traditional diving technology. Most notable about these salvage prospectors is without a doubt the Italian salvage company SORIMA, which actually gets founded after seeing one prototype of the HAGENUK diving suit in action. So they get to become this big diving company that does deep sea salvage work. And it's one of the most successful of all time. And they want to use, and in their early days use, the HAGENUK diving suit to great effect. Now, HAGENUK realizes that this project that they kept on the back burner for quite a while actually could have the potential to be big, to make them a lot of money. So they start the professionalization process. They let Gall go and his staff, and they hire German engineers from the HAGENUK who work together with Italian engineers who work with the SORIMA to continue development on the suit as a German-Italian venture. Here in figure 30, we have Gall writing to the prince that he had been let go from the company and they would continue development without him. This is very much the point where Gall's part of the story of the deep sea diving development ends. Instead, a team of engineers takes over, and these HAGENUK engineers will continue to develop the later designs of the diving suit. So here you can see some HAGENUK engineers actually holding some little models of deep sea diving designs. That's prototype 5 they're holding. And for me, this is one of the most amazing things I ever discovered in my research. And I really hope that I can find these little guys sometime, somewhere, and that they are still out there. But for Gall, this is the end of his journey with HAGENUK and the end of the deep sea diving design. Now, to revisit, Gall had been working on the suit since around 1906, even earlier possibly, and he had been working on it for 20 years, roundabout before he is let go. So it really took this big media hype connected to Prototype 5 to push the company in the direction to decide to completely take over Gall's personal project and make it their project. And that's where the development starts to shift and where the deep sea diver becomes this specialized equipment for wreck salvage. Gall moves on from the company. He was not the first person to come up with a design for a deep sea diving suit, but he was the first to see it through in a way that his suits actually were used outside of testing for commercial use, and that imparts to great effect. He had no technical knowledge, but he was a very determined worker. He was really good at acquiring investors, was his main skill, so to speak, and he did not give up. Even if once where he was at the brink of bankruptcy, he just kept going, designing his suit. Now, the joint design that he developed is one of the bases of modern atmospheric diving suits, so it was improved quite a lot since he came up with it in the 1910s. But some of the modern atmospheric diving suit still use some joint design that can be traced back to his joint design. Gall, after his time at HAGENUK, continued designing deep sea technologies. For example, this apparatus in figure 32, which he called the USA, the undersea search apparatus. And he really hoped to be able to dive down about 3,000 meters in this and be able to search the ocean floor for all kinds of valuable treasure. Now, I have no sources that talk about this technology actually being used. And my best guess is that Gall lived off the royalties that he got from his atmospheric diving suit he built with HAGENUK and did not make any more big splashes in the diving technology space. So, to recap, this is the early story of the HAGENUK Deep Sea Diver, and it is maybe not how you imagined it to go. It's the story about a layperson who was really determined to build this technology, who put a lot of effort into it, who really inspired people to believe in his vision and to invest in him and in his vision, and who learned a lot along his way, who managed to build these early designs. It is his determination that brought this technology to a place where it had been taken over and professionalized into the suit you can see in the History of Diving Museum. So the final suit design, which now stands in the exhibition. Now, our time is coming to a close for this presentation, so this is where I'd like to end. If you are interested in the later history of the HAGENUK Deep Sea Diver, then I encourage you to visit the exhibition in the History of Diving Museum if you haven't done it yet, and to see the part of the exhibition with the deep sea diver there. It's a most amazing object, and I very much encourage you to go there. I'm still researching. This is still a work in progress, so I'm still discovering the later history of the deep sea diver. Now, once my PhD is done, maybe if there's interest, I would be very happy to join you guys again and to present more about what I've discovered. For now, thank you so much for being part of this presentation, and I'm excited to do my best to answer all your questions. Thank you.
Presentation. Thank you so much, Christopher. I'm going to open the floor to anyone who has questions for you, both in person and over Zoom. I'll start with this one. So can you tell us a little bit about why the buoyancy device on the suit moved around so much? Because it started with like that weird telescope tail. It became, something like a hat. And then in the final product, of course, we see it around the waist. So can you tell us like why it changed position so much on the suit?
Yes. So I hope you can kind of tell from the little pictures you can see of all the different designs that yes, the around 1925, 1926, the buoyancy device moved back to the middle part of the suit. And the reason for that is actually well documented. So the problem with having the buoyancy device on top of the suit is that the diver would just stick out a very little bit amongst the sea when ascending. So you had a hard time spotting it. And by moving it to the waist, a lot more of the diver could stick out. So if you had a lot of waves and rough seas, you can still spot the diver very well. That was that reason. And the telescopic tail just probably, there's nothing in the sources about this, but I imagine when I see this design that it had too many parts to be viable as a buoyancy device.
Okay, we have another question from Michael. He says, thank you very much for this very interesting presentation. Is there an overview of how many of these perfected suits were built and in which countries were they sold? Was there any sort of mass production? Were they all handmade or one of a kind? So, go
Yes.
ahead.
So that's a great question, and I'm still trying to figure out all the answers to that, but I can give you some. So they were produced in Germany, they were produced by the HAGENUK, and they were also produced in Italy. So literature talks about at least 50 devices having been produced, and I was able to track down 8 of them today who still exists, and 7 of those are T2 diving suits. So the very last version, which was the diving suit that was produced in series for all kinds of different places. So there have been diving suits, of course, for Germany. Actually, the German Navy did use one in World War II for submarine support. There was at least one in France, which was also used in World War II. One has been sold to Norway in 1945, and the Russians and the Americans also got a lot of suits. Some they bought, some they took after World War II. And this actually leads to the US having the most surviving suits to this day of 4. So the US has the most suits to this day. Germany has 2 suits. In Germany, you can see in the Deutsches Museum in Munich, prototype 6 actually. Once they finish refurbishing the exhibition, you can see the last surviving prototype of the deep sea diver there, and also one T2 diving suit is in a private collection these days. So it was sold all around the world. It was built in Germany and in Italy. And it also was the basis for later diving suit models being built mainly in Italy as well.
Okay, so this is one more question I have. So, what in your opinion would be the most successful or notable salvage operation performed by the HAGENUK? I know about the Italian SORIMA with the Egypt. So, what would you say is the most significant salvage operation performed by that suit?
So the popular answer to that would be the salvage of the Egypt, which was one of the most successful salvages of all time. But actually, as it's well documented, the deep sea diver was used very little in this salvage, and it did not get used as a working diving suit, but as a basically uh, viewing submersible device that was later uh, built as its own thing, which you can also see in the HDM exhibition, actually. So they would take off the arms and the legs in a very basic sense and build an observation tower instead. The most successful salvage where this suit was used would have probably been an earlier SORIMA salvage, which would be the one of the Washington. So the Washington freight carrier that was sunk off the Italian coast and was salvaged with the deep sea diver and early model prototype 6 being used to great effect there because there was the perfect working depth for the suit. It was very nice waters, very calm waters, and the diver could actually pick up stuff and return to the surface. So that is where the suit was, to my knowledge, used to its most effectiveness. They used it to salvage train parts and all kinds of metals that they would then sell to have them scrapped and to get the money out of that salvage operation.
Okay, another question. Gall originally intended to use the suit for sponge diving. However, it appears that it was never used for that purpose. Was it? And if not, why not?
All right, so there are two problems of using the suit for sponge diving. Problem number one, there is no money in sponge diving during the time that the suit can actually be used. So the first prototype that actually sees use is prototype 5, that's in 1922. And sponge diving has very much moved on from 1906 when Gall first comes up with this idea. And the problems that sponge diving faced even intensified more. The main problem is the business model that Gall proposed was renting out these suits to sponge diving companies. And they would want, of course, great amounts of money to rent out the suit, but diving for sponges actually was not all that profitable to begin with. So getting a pound of sponges would net you about 6 cents in 1930s money. So very little money for quite a lot of sponges. And most sponge diving companies would just continue risking the lives of their employees instead of actually investing in such an expensive technology that would not produce enough sponges to be profitable. Another reason was that artificial sponges started getting developed more and started becoming more popular by the later stages of the suit development. There was, however, one Greek diving company that actually was interested in buying a suit very early on. So in the 1910s, they contact HAGENUK and want to buy a suit, and nothing really comes of it anymore. So there was interest in this technology, and there might have been a suit that actually was used for sponge diving, but it would not have been profitable for the sponge diving companies.
Okay, I do think that's it for questions, but that was a fantastic presentation. I really appreciate you taking time to broadcast with us all the way from Hamburg in Germany. So thank you again, Christopher. This video will go on our YouTube channel, so anyone who's watching, you are welcome to put your questions in the comments, and I'll make sure that Christopher is able to answer them. But thank you again for presenting with us, and thank you everyone for coming, and we'll see you next time.
Thank you so much for having me.